When one fragrant prank ignites a rebel spirit in our HOA-ridden neighborhood, can we turn the tables on Karen, or will her reign of grayness smother our colorful uprising? As dawn broke over our suburban slice of paradise, the vibrant blossoms in my freshly planted garden stretched their petals toward the sun, flaunting shades of color that defied Karen's drab regime. I was practically giddy at the sight. Each petal seemed to whisper, "Freedom." It was a tiny rebellion, painted in yellows and purples right in the front yard of my property, the heart of my quiet home. However, my fairy tale quickly unraveled when I spotted the plastic-wrapped tyrant herself, Karen Blanchard, brandishing her official HOA notice like a sword as she stomped across her impeccably manicured lawn that bore all the charm of a corporate waiting room. "You cannot disturb the aesthetic harmony of our neighborhood, Jamie," she barked, her business blazer flapping like a flag as she summoned the full force of her indignant entitlement. "Sure, Karen wouldn't want anything to ruin your 30 shades of gray." I couldn't stop the sarcasm from tumbling out, my only weapon against her grating authority. She glared at me, her piercing blue eyes narrowing as if they could shoot laser beams right through my DIY trowels. In the battleground that was our street, I stood my ground, refusing to let a little thing like Karen's end-of-the-world theatrics scare me away from my quest for a more colorful existence. "This is not just a garden, it's a statement," I declared, flipping my hair for dramatic effect, channeling my inner activist. Little did I know, Karen's idea of retaliation would come with a hefty dose of karma, topped with a side of absurdity that I could hardly have imagined. 2 days later, I was ready to unveil an ingenious plan. Inspired not just by rebellion, but by the creative urge to prank the queen of tight-laced decorum herself, I concocted a stink spray trap, an elaborate prank that would make even the best of comedians proud. Armed with a small sprayer filled with a mixture of what I hoped was not too offensive skunk scent, just pungent enough to make a point, I fashioned an envelope that looked enticingly like a cash prize notice. My intention was simple: draw Karen in with the promise of fortune, then unleash my olfactory horror as she caught a whiff of the ridiculousness I had orchestrated. Just the thought of her face, contorted in absolute betrayal as she grappled with the reality of my revenge, sent giggles bubbling up into my throat. With the bait in hand, I sauntered over to Karen's doorstep, feigning an air of innocent neighborly concern. One tap on her doorbell, and the countdown had begun. However, the moment she opened the door, the grandeur of the moment hung in the air, both of us staring at each other. In one hand, I held the seemingly harmless envelope. In the other, the sprayer was poised like a magician about to reveal his trick. I offered her my sweetest smile as I said, "I thought you might appreciate a little surprise, Karen. It's a cash prize for you." Like a hawk clocking a mouse, she snatched the envelope from my hand, not a hint of hesitation on her face as she tore it open with a swift motion and zero regard for personal space. My heart raced in a cocktail of excitement and terror as she dipped her fingers into the envelope and pulled out the sprayer, raised it to her nose, and took an eager whiff. In that moment, time slowed to a crawl. The aghast expression plastered on her face was the epitome of what I imagined a cartoon villain looked like when hoisted by their own petard. It took an agonizing second before the offensive odor hit her, but when it did, the sheer chaos of my victory was beyond spectacular. Karen coughed, sputtered, and practically danced back, her polished demeanor shattering as she flailed her arms in pure, unadulterated panic while her neighbors began to peer from behind their curtains. What followed was glorious. That woman, who had taken pleasure in dictating the whims of lawn color and shrub height, found herself overwhelmed by a fragrant storm of rebellion right on her doorstep. I doubled over in laughter, tears streaming down my cheeks as a flurry of rumors began to swirl through the neighborhood about how the once fear-inducing HOA board member had been outsmarted by a lowly flower bed. Just then, Eddie LeClaire, my good-natured ally from across the street, wandered over, sporting his iconic Hawaiian shirt and a knowing grin. "Did you really just give Queen Karen a lesson in neighborhood aesthetics?" he chortled, slapping me on the back. As I basked in the glorious aftermath of my antics, It dawned on me that maybe I hadn't just taken down the rule of an uptight HOA member. I had ignited a spirit of camaraderie among my neighbors. It felt good to laugh together instead of cower, in fear of the looming HOA board meetings. As I stood there, still chuckling and harboring petty mischief in my heart, I marveled at how a simple act of colorful defiance could turn the tide of community spirit. Was it just the start of a new movement against the looming grayness encroaching our lives? Only time would tell. Even in the chaotic aftermath of Karen's dramatic retreat, the air felt lighter around our neighborhood. The hearty whispers of laughter and shared glances of triumph began to circulate among the formerly timid residents who had long been cowed by the imperious HOA. Some dared to emerge from their homes, carefully peeling back the curtain of secrecy that had kept their spirits imprisoned. The days of Karen's reign were seemingly numbered, and not just because of the stench that clung to her doorstep. It was the scent of rebellion wafting through the air, intoxicating and exhilarating. I couldn't help but grin as I overheard Mrs. Peterson concocting plans for her new garden filled with gaudy flamingos, of all things. It felt like a revolution, a rallying call for all of us who had endured years of bland conformity under Karen's watchful eye. The following week, when I found myself in the bright glow of a Saturday morning, I noticed something extraordinary unfolding as the neighborhood buzzed with creativity. Armed with pots of paint splashed with all the colors of the rainbow, my fellow residents set about transforming their yards. Larry from 2 doors down decided to raise a flock of quirky garden gnomes, each one more eccentric than the last. Eddie, as my most faithful accomplice, proudly displayed a collection of inflatable pink flamingos on his front lawn. The originally drab exteriors morphed into a delightful patchwork of individuality, radiating smiles and cheer at every curbside. No longer were our lawns sterile canvases subdued by oppressive HOA rules. They sprang to life, reflecting our unique personalities, each whimsy colorfully blended into a patchwork of defiance. Karen, of course, had not yet been tamed. It was only a matter of time before she attempted to reclaim her territory. I was half expecting her to burst onto the scene like a villain in a superhero movie, her business suit replaced with a robe of righteousness. Sure enough, I spotted her from my window, marching with purpose, as if one of those well-rehearsed political marches. Waves of horror washed over her features as the once uniform lawns now flaunted their vibrant individuality. She looked like she had just discovered an uprising. I bit back the urge to cackle as I watched her glancing around, her blue eyes taking in the colorful pandemonium that had sprung up in her absence. It wasn't long before I heard the shrill wail of her voice, cutting through the sound of lawnmowers and laughter, setting the neighborhood on high alert. "You can't just change everything. This is a violation of HOA standards," she barked, her cheeks flushing crimson with indignation. How deliciously ironic. Watching her struggle as she parsed her outrage-filled words was like witnessing an improv comedy gone wrong, but it worked in our favor. Unbeknownst to Karen, the enemy lines were drawn, not among the residents, but amongst the neighborhood pets. Her tirade seemed to rally the local cats, who took it upon themselves to stage their own revolt, climbing on her perfectly trimmed hedges and batting at anything within reach. I could hardly contain my laughter as I pictured her wrath at becoming the cat lady in what once was her pristine garden. By the end of the week, it felt as though things had turned from Karen versus the neighborhood to Karen versus an entire flock of feline revolutionaries. Her days of snug control in the name of the HOA had tripped into a conspiracy she could neither comprehend nor combat. Her rule had become a farce, riddled with pet-related mockery. I overheard Eddie casually remark, "It's almost poetic, really. She tried to dictate our lives, and now she has a kitty contingent to deal with instead." The laughter shared among us felt like a healing balm. The chains of fear had crumbled. It dawned on me how wildly ironic it was that the very standards she imposed crushed the joy from our lives, only to spark a wild burst of creativity when she went unchecked. As the sun set each evening, our nightly gatherings turned into celebrations, cocktails in hand, orchestrating victory tales under the twinkling stare of the stars. You know, we should have a neighborhood festival. I suggested one chilly evening. Why not give ourselves a day to showcase our vibrant lives and quirks? The spirited discussions that followed gave birth to the suburban luau, an idea that struck like lightning. It was a chance to not just flaunt our individual styles, but to genuinely bond, a chance to unite against the tyranny of Karen and her oppressive reign. Maybe I had unwittingly stirred, not just a prank, but a movement that would usher in a new post-Karen era, an era rife with laughter, freedom, and all the colorful chaos we could muster against her monochromatic regime. With plans in motion for our fabulous festival, and Karen's indignation morphing daily into whimsical anecdotes, what lay ahead felt utterly vibrant. My heart raced with anticipation as we plotted, planned, and painted visions of a neighborhood that celebrated life. Would Karen finally relent, or would she forever be doomed to the cumbersome role of the villain, reduced to mere anecdotes in our grand festivity? The air was thick with speculation and mischief, leaving us all wondering. Was she utterly unaware of the magic brewing just beyond her scope of control? I couldn't wait to find out. What awaited us at the suburban luau? As the days unfolded in the aftermath of our neighborhood revolution, anticipation hung in the air, much like the scent of BBQ wafting from Eddie's backyard. The grand prep for the suburban luau had transformed into a delightful frenzy of planning. We turned every weekend into a mini festival of crafting and cooking, with our home serving as the de facto headquarters. I could hardly keep track of what was going on, but honestly, who could? The neighborhood was bursting with enthusiasm. Porch lights flickered in sync with the laughter that spilled into the streets, and it became clear that Karen, the self-appointed queen of conformity, had unwittingly fueled our creative rebellion. Every person had a task that suited both their skills and ambitions. Larry meticulously assembling a drink station featuring tropical cocktails, while Mrs. Peterson prepared garish lawn decorations that would make a peacock blush. Meanwhile, I couldn't help but picture the chaotic scene unfolding at Karen's house. She had become the unwitting comic relief in this suburban saga. I envisioned her storming through her meticulously curated interiors, ruminating over the series of feline attacks on her flower beds. One could almost hear the dramatic orchestral score rising in the background, accompanying her exasperated expressions. Those hooligan cats have zero respect for property values. I imagined her spitting out at her unsuspecting husband, who probably wondered if investing in a catnip-based charm might pacify her outrage. Oh, how I reveled in this picture of escalating chaos, smacking against her sterile existence. Meanwhile, our side was bursting with far too much laughter and cheerful lunacy to even contemplate the silent misery that echoed from her home. As the big day drew closer, our shenanigans reached a crescendo that practically echoed down the block. The entire neighborhood was alive with anticipation, people were blowing up inflatable palm trees, and kids were designating roles like hula master and lemonade stand bosses with the dutiful glee that could ignite any reveler's spirit. All of this culminated in a casual chat one evening with Eddie over the most crucial planning aspect, the centerpiece of our festivities, the well-deserved, yet rebellious, to hell with HOA banner. With equal parts mischief and mischief, we crafted an outrageous design featuring florid fonts and an iridescent finish that shimmered as if the banner itself was a protest in riotous colors. It felt like we were giving visual voice to all the pent-up frustrations our homes had ever endured under Karen's watchful eye, and what a satisfying expression of resistance it was. On the dawn of the suburban luau, the weather seemed to cheekily mirror our glee. Blue skies adorned with fluffy white clouds, promising a splendid day. I woke up bubbling with excitement, my Hawaiian print dress swirling around my knees, as I rushed out to set up the cooler filled with colorful drinks and snacks. As the sun climbed higher, it shed light on everyone's efforts. At nearby lawns, homes popped with vivid decor. The laughter, the chatter, it felt like the friction of an exhaled breath of liberation finally escaping our mouths. Vibrant flower arrangements, quirky lawn decorations, and my neon welcome to the luau where HOA rules don't apply Sign created a riot of colors that could draw even Karen's reluctant gaze. The pride of watching our neighborhood blossom in full regalia was nothing short of surreal. It was an outrageous festival bursting with joy and quirky character, each piece magnifying our collective sense of empowerment. As the day wore on, Golden Beach tunes filled the air, merging with the lively banter of newly emboldened neighbors. I spotted Karen in the distance, that familiar pristine outfit of hers, and what seemed to be an absolutely unavoidable scowl coming across her face. It was perfect. She was drawn to the festivities like a moth to the flame, despite her evident distaste. I had to give her credit. She had a knack for appearing at just the right moment, like an unwanted plot twist. Part of me imagined she would attempt to lecture us on noise complaints or unsanctioned decorations, but the other part envisioned her losing her cool entirely, unable to contain herself in the face of this wild rebellion. Her struggle now was a delightful combination of determination and despair, a comedy of errors I was utterly here for. As the sun dipped lower in the sky, I caught sight of Eddie, huddled near the flamingo statue he had dubbed Clara, hand on his hip, laughing heartily at an outrageous costume someone was donning. An inflatably palm tree, no less. "It's official. We're unstoppable," I declared, clinking my drink against his. And when I looked around, it struck me. We had transformed our once sterile HOA-approved lives into a tableau of individuality and delight. We had sewn together a tapestry of experiences, a rebellion that blossomed wildly across yards that used to pale under the regimented rule of Karen. We were no longer just neighbors. We were a community, defiant and alive, even as a cloud of chaos descended in the form of our former overlord. Then it happened. Just as the first hula dance commenced, with careful guidance from the neighborhood children, of course, our ears pricked up at the sound of a familiar voice cutting through the otherwise jovial atmosphere. "This is unacceptable." Karen's voice rang sharp and clear. A collective hush fell over the crowd, turning all heads toward her hurricane of indignation. But instead of recoiling in fear, a spark of joy broke within us. A united heart of laughter could be felt pumping through our gathered bodies as we stilled in anticipation. Would she finally bring her melodrama to our grand assembly, or would she become yet another punchline in our suburban saga? The stakes felt astronomically high, and there was no escaping the tension that filled the air. At that moment, we all shared a common thought. We were ready for the showdown. As Karen stormed towards us, her polished eyebrows knit in that trademark frown, you could almost sense the seismic shift in momentum among our group. I felt a bubbling mix of excitement and dread, reminding me of the moment just before stepping onto a stage. Did we dare to reveal our unsanctioned defiance? With each stride she took, the tension thickened. The children paused mid-hula, their laughter caught like confetti in the air, ready to drop at the crown's whim. And then, just when it seemed that the very fabric of our joy was about to be torn asunder, Karen reached us, her hands on her hips, a queen reigning over her uneasy court. "This is unacceptable," she bellowed, the volume causing a few nearby birds to take flight in protest. Now, for a brief moment, I contemplated what her unacceptable could even mean on this momentous day. It could be the unruly decorations, which she undoubtedly deemed garish, or perhaps it would be our music, more splashing surf than soporific instrumental snooze. Maybe she caught wind of the "To Hell with HOA" banner flapping proudly in the breeze, tiny palm trees dancing alongside its audacious text. The sheer amusement on the faces of my neighbors prompted me to fight the urge to smirk. Instead, I slid into a role I had never intended to play, the diplomat for the people. "Karen, we are simply celebrating our community. Look at the joy we're creating," I said confidently, adopting the poise of an ambassador. But of course, her glare intensified, fueled by indignation and, perhaps, a hint of shock at my audacity. Her piercing blue eyes darted from one festive decoration to another, their scrutiny heavy enough to melt even the bravest flamingo statue. "You can't just throw a party without the HOA's approval," she sniffed with an almost accusatory tone, making the very air around us tremble. "What will happen to the property values? This is a neighborhood, not a circus." In that moment, The irony hit me like a wave. Who was the real circus performer here? As if on cue, Eddie sauntered up nonchalantly, wearing a garland of brightly colored flowers around his neck and holding a coconut drink with an awkward but adult level of nonchalance. Yet it seems everyone enjoys the circus, Karen, he chimed in with a grin, punctuating his words with a playful toast. My heart swelled, amused by the absurdity that enveloped our standoff. Even amidst the possible collapse of calm, we were still jovial spirit keepers, thriving while our foe overlord raged. As she continued to flounder, I could hardly contain my laughter. You know, Karen, it turns out you can boost property values with good old-fashioned fun, I offered, winking at my crowd who, emboldened by Eddie's quip and bolstered by communal laughter, seemed to look at her less like a tyrant and more like an unwelcome spectator in this lively tableau. The absurdity of her rigid demeanor against the rich backdrop of our spirited festivity felt almost cinematic. Finally, with all dignity slipping through her fingers like the grains of sand she most likely despised, Karen's mouth hung open in stunned silence for a heartbeat. Would she go for the death-defying lecture, or would she strike with an unexpected twist of vulnerability? And then, as if the universe conspired to grant us a little more delightful irony, something extraordinary happened. As Karen opened her mouth to unleash another barrage of critiques, her husband, that poor man forever shackled to her bitterness, wandered into the scene, juggling a few cupcakes and drink containers he'd somehow been designated to carry. Caught in the thrall of authority, he miscalculated his approach and stumbled, comically, and sent the cupcakes flying like fluffy projectiles straight toward Karen. It was en garde for Karen as she staggered back in slow motion, her pristine outfit transitioning from polished authority to a not-so-polished mess. Just as I thought she might dodge the onslaught, one pink frosted cupcake landed squarely on the tip of her pointed nose. A collective gasp echoed across our gathering, swiftly transforming into raucous laughter. Amidst the fits of delight radiating from the crowd, I thought, could the universe be so delectably cruel? Was this the pinnacle of karma served cold? Karen stood frozen, splattered in confectionery embarrassment, her usual scowl melting like icing under pressure. It was as if the cosmos had decided she needed a dose of humility, baked bad, if you will. With each chuckle rising up, a weight seemed to be lifted from the shoulders of my neighbors, years of oppression painted over with the amusing tragedy unfolding before us. This juiced our spirit of rebellion, the line between perception and reality almost blurred, the laughter shattering the very glass ceiling of her self-righteousness. In that historic moment, as Karen wiped frosting from her cheeks and her husband hurried to help, the laughter crescendoed into an explosion of collective joy. I felt a fierce surge of empowerment race through the crowd. It cemented our united front against both Karen and the HOA. As the haze of drama danced around us, it dawned on me that today was not just about a luau. This was our declaration of independence, our mark on this suburban canvas. The festive spirit we harbored wasn't merely a rebellious act. It was our assertion that happiness shouldn't need approval. As I exchanged sparkling smiles with Eddie, our eyes glinting with mischief, it was clear no HOA official would dare hold us back again. And with that thought rippling through us, I wondered, how far would this laughter carry us? As the waves of laughter subsided, Karen, now wedged between her humiliation and fury, attempted to regain her composure. With frosting still clinging to her bob like an unfortunate hair accessory, she looked like a deflated balloon desperately trying to float again. I watched, part morbidly fascinated, part exhilarated, as she stammered her way through a series of futile threats, her voice a pitch higher than the afternoon's jovial tunes. You think this is funny? You all will pay for your insolence. Her voice, once authoritative, now sounded more like that of a petulant teenager, hormones unchecked and ego bruised. But as the sun cast a warm glow over the scene, I realized the audacity of her threats wouldn't cascade over our newly revived spirit of rebellion anywhere close to as smoothly as one of Eddie's infamous coconut drinks. Eddie, ever the whimsical jester of the neighborhood, seized the moment. With exaggerated motions, he reached for an empty cupcake box, pretending to take notes. Oh, this is rich, folks. Karen has officially declared war on fun. The surrounding neighbors roared with laughter, fully embracing the absurdity of the very situation that a crisp HOA letter would rally into blitzkrieg. He closed the cupcake box, sealing away the frosting-stained soul of our antagonist. And don't forget to take notes on how to make a proper celebratory cupcake, Karen. Rolling in laughter, the neighbors waved their phones, ready to immortalize this culinary conflict for Instagram. After all, what's better than frosting wars to justify your social media feed? It was almost poetic. My neighbor turning her military-grade oppression into a Shakespearean comedy set in suburbia, frosting flung and all. The sweat of my anxiety melted away. This wasn't just laughter. It was the glorious music of liberation, designed to send waves through the HOA and reverberate throughout the community. And yet, as empowering as this revelry felt, my mind raced ahead, tangled with the impending HOA meeting, looming large like a dark storm cloud. If humiliation could become motivation for retaliation, who could have the audacity to poke the bear when she was so royally ruffled? I remembered Karen's hard stares and even harder words through disputes about flower beds and fence heights, all charged with an air of "how dare you." I shuddered. How much of that fear remained, and how much had been washed away in our laughing escape? I had to prepare for the worst, but today was not about showing up quiet and ashamed. It was about healthy rebellion. Karen had become careless in her threats, but I couldn't shake the feeling that twisting the knife too far might lead to a greatly magnified punishment. Still absorbed in the spontaneous revelry, I exchanged glances with Eddie, who was still working the crowd like the charismatic leader he was known to be. Maybe you should refrain from extra pettiness, Jamie," he whispered, noting the glint of mischief in my eyes. "You never know how far she's willing to go." He was right. I couldn't afford to unwrap her fury just yet. We needed to maintain our newfound momentum without handing her the ammunition for retaliation, no matter how deserving she was. Before I could respond, a savvy neighbor chimed in. "Why don't we prepare a little HOA rebuttal, one that illustrates our reunion behind community spirit?" My heart raced as the idea simmered across the crowd like fresh-baked bread wafting through the neighborhood. A collective nod swept through everyone, faces lighting up with the excitement of plotting our glorious display of unity. My stubborn streak began polishing itself plate smooth, considering how far I could take this without sending regrettable messages through the community grapevine. Think about it, people. We could draft a statement applauding the virtues of community and reminding Karen where she sits in rank the next time she wields her indistinguishable power over our lives. Just as the laughter began to wane and the spirit of mischief permeated our collective thoughts, Eddie chimed in with a grin wider than the ocean. "And let's not forget, we have the cupcakes as evidence and mascot for our rebellion. We may just officially declare frosting for freedom." His words kicked profound chaos into hysterics, urging everyone to envision frosting-laden protests alongside our newly embossed tote bags, proclaiming the victory of neighborhood camaraderie. Laughter erupted into ideas brewing like excessive coffee in the morning, and we were becoming a patchwork quilt woven by sheer insanity and camaraderie. I could almost hear the gears turning in everyone's heads, and with that synergy igniting the atmosphere, it was clear we were on the cusp of mobilizing against the dreaded HOA specter that had long haunted us. So, fortified by frosting and fierce laughter, we turned our radar towards the HOA meeting that awaited where more fireworks might ignite. A playful glint filled my eyes as I surveyed the smiling faces, lit with new ambition. Suddenly, everything felt feasible. As Eddie clinked coconut drinks against happy hands and thumbs up were exchanged like secret signals among my comrades, we rejoiced in the triumph of humor over stubborn malice. Today we had powdered our own allies with laughter, and would seamlessly translate that energy into an assertion so much grander than simply daring to show vibrance in the community. We would revolutionize our spirit from mere survival to absolute joy. The question hung in my mind. Who knew what poetic justice awaited us at the HOA meeting? And this time, who would be laughing last? The night of the HOA meeting arrived, and I felt a delicious thrill racing through me like a roller coaster speeding down its tracks. Dressed in my most vibrant graphic tee emblazoned with "No drama, just cupcakes," I realized how appropriate my choice was. It was practically a battle standard waving in the face of Karen's drab blazer. As I marched toward the community center, I could practically feel the passionate spirits of my neighbors at my back, still buzzing with the after effects of frosting liberation. Eddie strutted beside me, clutching his faux coconut drink with an exaggerated sense of importance, his curly hair fluffing in the evening breeze like a natural crown. We were ready to poke the bear, armed not only with frosting but a united front that promised to drown out the screeches of one very disgruntled Karen Blanchard, if she dared to open her mouth again. Upon entering the starkly lit room, I felt my confidence bubble, buoyed up by memories of laughter and camaraderie. And there she was, Karen Blanchard, perched on her usual throne at the head of the table, her piercing blue eyes almost sparking. She clutched a rigid file folder like it was the last shield between her and a full-blown rebellion. The moment she caught sight of me, her expression flickered between fury and something darker, something slippery, like anger, trying to disguise itself as polite annoyance. "Well, if it isn't the Cupcake Crusader herself," she snapped, her tone draped in a faux air of civility that barely masked her disdain. I couldn't help but chuckle. Hers was the kind of confidence you'd buy for $1 at a discount store. It just wouldn't last. Focusing on the crowd, I spotted nodding heads and subtle smiles that let me know I wasn't alone. I was one of them, a proud member of what felt like a growing movement to reclaim our neighborhood from the iron grip of frostbitten authority. "Karen," I started, raising my voice with mock sincerity, "I trust you've had your lawyers prepare a comprehensive analysis of how much frosting containment was required during last night's cupcake frivolity." Murmurs of laughter followed, and Karen's face transformed from pale to crimson, as if I'd flipped a switch on her embarrassment. Next to me, Eddie let out a mischievous giggle, clearly delighted with the prospect of the hilarity we were carving into the meeting's agenda. It was impressive how quickly the atmosphere shifted, from a dull meeting caricature to a stage for an epic showdown that was refreshing in its absurdity. Karen attempted to regain her composure, clearing her throat with the seriousness of a lioness about to pounce, but I could see the tremble in her hands. "This is not a joke, Jamie. Rules are meant to be respected. These gatherings are for community discussion, not frosting festivals." Her authority tone had lost its power, replaced by an almost pleading pitch. Insubordination must be addressed, or chaos will unfurl. As if to drive her point home, she gestured wildly, nearly knocking over an unsuspecting vase filled with naturally tasteless plastic flowers. The image was priceless. That moment I realized the only chaos she needed to worry about was the chaos of laughter rising up to drown out her words. "Chaos?" I repeated, an eyebrow arched in genuine amusement. "There's nothing chaotic here. Just a community that's fed up with being dictated by a queen of mayhem." The response from our small troop was like tossing a pebble into a still pond. Ripples of excitement moved across the room as chuckles turned into outright mirth. Eddie leaned closer, whispering, "Whoa, you should run for office. Get a frosting overreach committee founded." I bit my lip to contain my laughter, feeling the surge of a shared joke, elevating our spirits even higher. Suddenly, the tide wasn't just turning. It was crashing against the cliffs of Karen's authority, threatening to wash away her claims of control. I gestured towards a fellow neighbor, Angela, who had been quietly stifling her giggles. "Angela, why don't you enlighten us on how the cupcake escapade will affect the aesthetics of our yards?" I asked, knowing her infectious laugh would be the trigger. "Please, do we even need a professional opinion?" Angela laughed, standing up for a sweet moment on the community stage. "Yesterday's sweet spectacle simply proves our dedication to community flavor. Every sprinkle of frosting was an ode to creativity versus Karen's staleness." Applause erupted, affirming my suspicion that the tide had turned permanently. Karen struggled visibly, her mouth opening and closing as she grasped for anything resembling a counter-argument, only to find herself outmanned and out of ideas. The laughter spilled over into wild enthusiasm, and with each passing moment, I felt the laughter forging bonds that shimmered in contrast to the drab world of HOA rules. We were no longer just residents of the same neighborhood. We were a band of merry rebels, kicking up frosting in the name of unity while Karen stood aghast, her position eroding with each outburst of exhilaration from our merry cluster. As I leaned back, a smile spread across my face. It was absurd and glorious, and I couldn't help but wonder when the frosting-slathered tide would finally wash over Karen completely. How about we toast to community spirit, folks? A spirit that won't be muzzled by outdated regulations, Eddie exclaimed, raising his faux coconut drink as a comedic offering. The community roared back a hearty affirmation, arms flailing like we were already at a victory parade. The transformation of this meeting had become so monumental, it was almost poetic. We were not just discussing rules, we were celebrating rebellion. With energy feeding off one another, I swung my arm confidently towards Karen and declared, "Embrace creativity, not oppression." What could she possibly say next? The moment felt triumphant and yet exhilaratingly chaotic. As I took my seat again, I glanced at Karen, her expression now entirely deflated, still grasping her folder like a lifeline. It was clear that the era of her iron-fisted rule was over, and the HOA was now under new management. Our makeup-smeared faces could only hope "Cupcake Revolt" would be the next neighborhood headline. Just then, a thought bubbled up amidst my victory glee. Would she retaliate? What would be on the horizon of this newfound war? But as Eddie raised his faux drink high, we drowned out those nagging doubts with frothy laughter and camaraderie, igniting the embers of what would be a night to remember. The next question lingered above us in the laughter. How would she respond to such deliciously bold defiance? As the echoes of laughter faded, Karen crossed her arms tighter than a toddler, refusing their broccoli. The blush of fury had turned her hue an alarming shade of tomato, and I half expected steam to come out of her ears. It was amusing how quickly she went from the self-proclaimed queen of HOA to just another bemused antagonist in our neighborhood drama. I could almost hear the audience in my head chanting for a rematch. There was a spark of something remarkable in the air, a heady blend of relief and rebellion stirring amongst the townspeople. We were no longer just a bunch of yard-flaunting misfits. We were a movement. The frosting fiasco had taken on a life of its own, transforming us from subservient homeowners into a collective force of color and audio mayhem, ready to burst forth at a moment's notice. But then, like a bad sequel nobody asked for, Karen decided she wasn't done with us just yet. "This isn't over, you cupcake-wielding anarchists," she barked, raising her voice so high it could have shattered glass. You could practically hear the collective gasp of townsfolk filling up the space like pressure building in a soda can. Her need for dominion had morphed into pure fuel for our rebellion. If she thought her declaration would frighten us, she had underestimated the power of frosting-covered friendships. It was endearing, really, how she believed her passion for authority outweighed our newfound glee for freedom. Next to me, Eddie snickered loudly. "I've never seen someone so passionately protective over pastels before," he quipped, earning a chorus of soft chuckles that made Karen's face flush further. A tomato was a mild comparison. Amidst the spectacle, a mischievous idea began to swirl in my mind, like the frosting we had smeared everywhere. "How about a little game?" I suggested, feigning innocence. The way Karen's eyes narrowed back at me was dreamlike, like someone unprepared to step onto a roller coaster. The crowd turned, eager for my outlandish scheme. Let's have a neighborly contest. A best yard competition, but with a twist. Our gardens will flourish in creativity, expressing our unique identities. Instead of adhering to Karen's oppressive guidelines, I announced dramatically, arms flung wide as though framing the very concept of liberation. The audience applauded enthusiastically, a veritable affirmation to the spirit buzzing within our little community. Winner gets a plaque, but also they'll get to design the next neighborhood event, I added, relishing the idea of sending Karen's strict adherence to orders sailing out the window on a breeze of inspiration. The murmur of excitement rippled like a warm breeze through the crowd, Everyone seemed to practically squirm with anticipation. "And if I win," I continued, "then I propose a mandatory cupcake-themed festival where we can celebrate being ourselves without fear of reprimand," I concluded, watching as Karen's mouth fell open slightly, and she blinked, as though attempting to recalibrate the signals between her brain and her outrage. For a brief second, I thought she'd explode, but to her merit, she only sputtered through a series of incoherent noises. Eddie leaned in, grinning widely. "Oh, you're totally going to win that, Jamie. You're the queen of confections." It felt like a weight had been lifted off my shoulders. Confrontation had transformed into camaraderie like a classic fairy tale. The chaos that previously seemed so terrifying melted into an arms up, ready for battle scenario, but now it was sprinkled with humor and sweet rebellion. I felt empowered, standing surrounded by my neighbors, confident in the ridiculousness of our cake-themed revolution against the blandness of Karen's regime. Amongst the clamor of supports, laughter erupted once more, fueling the vibrant energy that had permeated the room. For once, we were free spirits ready to embrace the absurd and commend each other's uniqueness, like the art that adorned our homes. With the challenge issued, one could practically hear Karen's gears screeching as she grasped for control, her foundation crumbling beneath the weight of community spirit. "You think this is how it's going to be?" she stammered, desperately trying to find her footing as candies and conflicts buzzed like fireflies around her. "I assure you all that I will hire experts to study the freshest flowers and rule interpretations," she cried dramatically, her ever-so-polished demeanor cracking like cheap porcelain under pressure. It was as though she was trying to summon her former dignity, but at that point her threats felt more theatrics than genuine attempts at deterrence. Instead, we just laughed harder, sharing glances that promised an overriding sense of unity over stupid HOA rules. Looking at my neighbors, I felt a surge of genuine warmth spread through me, from the enthusiastic thumbs up from Angela to the twinkling encouragement in Eddie's eyes. We were no longer just about flowers or yards. We were embracing our quirkiness, our individuality, and the ability to speak against powers that seemed insurmountable at times. Karen was but a mere obstacle now, a caricature in a comedy we were writing together. The meeting became not just a gathering, but rather an anthem of solidarity against the tyranny of the mundane. "All right then, let's kick off this contest. Who's with me?" I shouted, clutching my heart like a valiant knight going into battle for honorable causes. The applause erupted, the sense of community soared, and beyond that, I could almost taste victory flavored with sprinkles. As we celebrated this ludicrously delightful armistice, with cupcakes of rebellion in our hearts, the air shimmered with optimism. Karen, however, didn't leave empty-handed. Oh no! This encounter would certainly venture to tickle the recall committee's imaginations, but who would care about that now? "Tomorrow, let the games begin," I proclaimed, for no matter what, we had done the impossible. The tide had finally changed, and perhaps the greatest victory would be to emerge as ourselves, everyone's quirks and oddities blooming deliberately where they belonged. After all, life's too short to conform to unrealistic HOA demands, isn't it?